Hey everyone, it's me again. At the time that this video is scheduled to go out, this coming Friday, the next day will be my birthday, the 21st. So as a result, I thought I would share a kind of more personal story about my journey towards puppetry and a little bit of a fun history that I wanted to I've told the story before, but I wanted to get this down for posterity, as it were. So stay tuned for the Fraggle story. As I've mentioned on my very first vlog, I became interested in puppets and puppetry very, very early. The first toy I can ever remember having was a dog puppet. And I was at exactly the right age when Sesame Street and then the Muppets hit with the kind of full force that they did. And so, of course, I just became obsessed with everything puppetry and everything Jim Henson and everything the Muppets. That was just my entire world. Now, I was the kind of kid, like a lot of us, who was just not content with enjoying a thing, with just being a consumer. I wanted to find out how it worked. So I started, looking for anything I could find. Now, remember, this is the late 70s, early 80s. There's no internet, so finding, material was difficult. Luckily, at my local library was this book. Try and make it so you can see. Glossy cover. Most of the puppet people watching this will know this book already. This is The Art of the Puppet by Bill Baird. If you want to know who the puppet person was before Jim Henson, it was Bill Baird. And this was a really great find for me as a kid because it is, first of all, the entire history of puppetry as an art form, and second, it's fascinating in that this book was published just as Jim Henson and the Muppets were becoming a thing. So there's literally just one reference to Jim and the Muppets, and it's this. Let's see if I get this in camera here. There we go. Wilkins and Watkins. So this is the Salmon Friends era. And it was just sort of mentions how they're an up and coming thing, but they were not the thing yet. And so this is a fascinating sort of slice of puppet history pre-Henson. And, if there's any sort of date that you can sort of say, oh, here's the history of puppetry can be marked pre-Henson and post-Henson, I think that's a fair thing to say. This is an archive of pre-Henson puppetry, and that was the first time I kind of had the idea of making puppets as well as performing puppets. Now, I think I was probably about 13 when I started the idea of making puppets. And, as I said, there's no internet, there's no Adam Krutinger videos, out there to help you. So I just had to sort of figure it out myself. And I would get the best pictures of the Muppets that I could and sort of try and figure out how this was done and what was this made out of. I was lucky enough that our local Zellers, which for the non-Canadians in there, that's basically Walmart before Walmart, had these big, 4-foot upholstery foam wedges. Obviously intended to be made into cushions or whatever, but they were fairly cheap, so I could spend my allowance on that, and I would get those. And out of a 4-foot wedge, I could chop that up into I could make 4 or 5 heads out of that. So I would get these upholstery foam wedges and just start hacking at them with scissors. Really, really crude. One of the biggest mysteries to me as a kid was, how do the Muppets get their foam so smooth, right? Because I'm sitting here with just scissors trying to carve this foam, and I'm a 13-year-old kid, right? I don't have the patience to be careful. So, it was real crude. And, I would take it and then I would sort of hollow it out, and with hot glue and cardboard, I would sort of glue a mouth plate in there, and I would make a functional puppet, but boy, they did not look good. Ended up spray painting most of them because I couldn't figure out how to get color onto it. But nevertheless, it was a really good experience because it sort of taught me how to work with materials, and understanding the fabrication process, as crude as it was a real good ground. I was fortunate enough to have a friend. Because of course, the standard puppeteer story, I was a weird loner. But I did have a friend, and I got my friend, Glenn. into puppetry and puppet building too, and it was really fascinating and fun because we would, trade ideas and design our own puppets, and we would build them in the basement, and it was a real fun little creative time. Then the news hit that there was going to be a traveling exhibit of the Muppets and Jim Henson called The Art of the Muppets. This was an exhibit that was going to be traveling around to various museums. I think it started in England, but then it came to North America. And we found out that it was going to be at the Ontario Science Centre. And this was heaven, right? So we would go, Glenn and I would go to the Art of the Muppets exhibit at the Ontario Science Centre as often as we possibly could. I mean, stopped spending our allowance on materials and started spending it on the admission fee for the Ontario Science Centre. And we wouldn't go to the rest of the Science Centre. We'd already been there tons of times. We would just go and spend the day walking around, looking at the actual Muppets in cases. And it was a really great exhibit because Jim was personally involved in creating it, and his idea was he wanted people to sort of experience and see what it was like actually making the Muppets. So I remember the first thing when you walk in was what he called the touch wall, which was just a big wall that had like materials like fleece and fur and foam sort of stuck on it, and you could go and you could actually touch. And this was his idea, that you would get an idea of the physicality of what was involved with making up the Muppets. And it was a great, great exhibit. So we would just go and be there, and just to be among the actual Muppets was a joy. Now the exhibit, when it came to Toronto, was kind of timed to coincide with the launch of Fraggle Rock. And I don't know how many people know this, Fraggle Rock was actually shot in Toronto. So there was quite a lot of Fraggle stuff in it. In fact, the very last thing I remember as you left the exhibit, because it was kind of chronological, when you, on the way out, the case that was there was all the main Fraggle characters. And at the time, Glenn and I didn't really know much about Fraggle Rock. We'd seen some of the publicity stills, and we saw, of course, the characters in the cases. But the show hadn't launched yet, so we didn't really know what it was about, but we just loved the design of the characters. So one of the first things we did was we went home and started designing our own. We didn't call them Fraggles, but they were Fraggles. Mine was orange and Glenn's was blue, if I remember correctly. You may have been green, but I think it was blue. And we were pretty proud of them. They weren't great. They were still the same crude, hacked out of raw foam and spray painted, but they were probably the best puppets that we had made, so we were pretty proud of them. One of the features of the Art of the Muppets exhibit in Toronto, at least, I don't know if this was the case for every museum, but in Toronto, they had live demonstrations, and I think it was easy for them to do it in Toronto because this is where they shot Fraggle Rock, so everybody was here anyway. So there was kind of a central courtyard, and there was a stage and cameras and monitors, and they would have performers come out with minor background Fraggle characters right from the show and do live demonstrations right there. And of course, Glenn and I were just enraptured and fascinated by this. And then we found out that the exhibit was closing soon. And this was slightly devastating because we hadn't even considered the possibility. It had been there. It was at the Science Center for about a year. So, to a kid, this was like forever. We're just always going to have this. And then we found out it was going away. So the very last time that we went, I don't think it was the last day. In my head mythology, it was the last day, but I don't think that was the case. But on the very last time that we went, we kind of looked at each other and went, we're taking the puppets, right? Yeah. So we, I guess we were 14 at this time, bundled up our puppets onto the bus, went to the Science Center, and spent the day walking around the Art of the Muppets exhibit with puppets and basically busking, I guess. And, I guess we probably confused a lot of people as to what are these kids doing with these strange hacked up Muppets. But nevertheless, it was fun for us, and it was great to just have our creations next to actual Muppets. That was, a very special thing. So then, of course, comes the live demonstration, and we are, as always, in the audience. Now, the one that I had The paint that I used for him was literally this safety neon orange. That's all I had in the house. So my dad had it for something. So I just used that. So of course, under studio lights, it just glowed. It was this it was a neon puppet. It could have been a blacklight puppet. So we're in the audience for the live demonstration, and the two performers, there's a man and a woman, comes out. They each have a Fraggle, background Fraggle, not one of the main ones. But they do the whole demonstration. And then at the end, they look out in the crowd and they go, "Oh, I see we have a couple of puppets in our audience. Why don't you guys come up here?" So Glenn and I, of course, look at each other, stunned, deer in headlights moment. But of course we did. So we climb up on stage, and neither of us had hit a growth spurt yet. So we were a full head shorter, than the performers, and the camera is set for their height. So, all you can see are the eyes of our characters just kind of poking up. But we soldiered on through. We did a little performance with them, and that was we thought this is it. We're on stage performing with actual Muppeteers and actual Muppets. It doesn't get better than this. It got better. So the demonstration ends, and the Muppet performers look at Glenn and I and say, "That was great. Why don't you guys come on backstage? Let's get a closer look." So Glenn and I are like, "Okay." So we go backstage, and they're looking at our puppets, and they're being very enthusiastic and very generous and kind. Going, "Wow, this is great. How'd you do this?" And I think it was fun for them to just see a couple of kids who were so into it that they did this, right? So, and then they went, "Well, here, do you want to try this on?" Do I want to try on the actual Muppet? Yeah, I want to try on the Muppet. So we traded puppets. I got a very pudgy beige Fraggle. A lot of the background Fraggles had names. It turns out this chap's name was Pudge. I'll never forget this. And I slipped on an actual, for real Muppet Fraggle. Of course, it was made beautifully, as you would expect. It was a flexible mouth plate, probably gasket rubber, but I will never forget, as I seated my hand, there was a ring, sort of a raised disc, just where my middle finger sat on the nose, just to sort of give a little guide. There were no grips inside, which was interesting, but there was just a sort of little placement marker for where your finger should go, and it was just so comfortable. And so expressive. Anything you did, of course, this is the best of the best making this stuff, so of course it was. But just enraptured. I mean, how good is this? A kid who grew up worshiping the Muppets, and here I am backstage with actual Muppeteers trying on an actual Muppet. And of course, then it was a bit of a roller coaster. Now, one thing I don't know if a lot of people know is most of the background Fraggles, and I think even probably the main Fraggles, were made kind of modular like whatnots. So you could take the head off, you could take the arms and the legs off, and you could put new heads and arms and legs, and you could mix and match and make up new Fraggles like that. So Pudge's arms were attached with just a sort of plastic snap. And now, of course, I've got this actual Muppet, so I am trying to look at every possible detail and just try and take this whole thing in this one golden moment, of course. So I'm touching everything. I'm trying to memorize this. And then I pulled his arm off. And I saw at least, oh good, it's supposed to do that. It's a plastic snap, but I couldn't get it back on. I was so nervous, of course, that I'm just fumbling with this thing. And nobody had saw that I had pulled his arm off because they were talking to Glenn, and I was just fascinated playing with this thing. So I'm panicking, right? It's oh, the good news is you get to use a real Muppet. The bad news is you broke it. So eventually I had to turn to the lady and say, I'm sorry, I can't, I did this, I can't. She was like, oh no, it's fine. It's a little fiddly. And she just snapped it back on and it was fine. And I have no other memory of the rest of that day, of course, because how does it get any better than that, right? The only thing that would have been better is them saying, "I want you boys come and like intern at the show," but that didn't happen. We were 14, possibly even 15 at the time. I'll have to check the dates and see if they line up, but I know it was around that age. And we kind of felt like we were growing out of this a little bit. That was a mistake, but that was, when you're 14, what do you know? So this was kind of the end point of our active participation in this thing, and soon after it kind of fell away and we got into video games and stuff, and the puppet thing kind of faded away. But that was sort of the high water mark for us. And as I mentioned on my first vlog, I just kind of forgot about it. Never lost the love of it, but just didn't even really think that it was a viable thing to be doing until literally 35 years later, when in 2018, when I'm at the Museum of the Moving Image Jim Henson exhibit, and I tried on an actual puppet for the first time in 35 years, and everything just came back, and that all led to the Oracle. So as most of you I hope know, and if you don't, you'll know now, most of the puppets that have appeared in the show so far have not been made by me. I hadn't touched building a puppet literally since I was 14, so I had no idea how to do it right. And so when I started getting puppets for the show, I found other builders and commissioned them to build the puppets. But lately I thought, why not bring it full circle? Let's just see what you can do. Now, I haven't built anything really in 35 years. And so I had no idea what I was really getting into. I had never used a sewing machine really before. No idea how it worked. So, with the help of my wife and with the help of particularly Adam Krutinger, if you don't know him, you probably know him. But if you don't know him, he is the puppet building guru. And he has tons of fantastic tutorial videos. So for the past couple months, I've been teaching myself how to build puppets, and I've got to a point that I think is not bad. I'm happy enough that I know now that the characters that I want for the show as we go forward, I'm going to be making myself. And of course, another aspect of that is the channel is not big enough to be monetized. I don't think it ever will be, but that's fine. But nevertheless, it does incur some expense, of course, and I would like to be able to have the puppet thing have a little bit of income generated. So one of the things I've decided to do is open an Etsy shop and sell puppets that I make myself. But I spent some time coming up with a design that I can make fairly quickly, that is relatively simple, and yet is still, I think, a good enough quality that people are going to want it. And I'm going to be selling these as professional practice puppets, because that's basically what they are. And because I like things that are poetic, here is the first guy that I'm going to be selling. I'm calling these guys Greeblees, because Fraggle, of course, is copyrighted. But nevertheless, here he is. Orange, of course, because his predecessor was orange. But there he is. There's the Greeblee. We're going to be selling in 3 different colors, so don't worry. You'll be able to customize the color. This is just the first one that was done for production. You can see the prototype behind me there. So there we go. There's the Greeblee. He is the first puppet that I have made for real since I was 14, based on the design of the puppet that I had with me when I tried on a for real Fraggle. So, it's poetry, it's all come full circle, and everything's good. So thanks for watching, and I hope I'll catch you next time. Bye!